The ongoing violence in KwaZulu-Natal has played itself out at the Glebelands hostel near Umlazi. A large portion of the Murani Commission described the hostel as a hotbed of criminal activity and a home for hitmen. Good evening and welcome to Unfiltered. My name is Aldrin Simpier. So a group of hitmen linked to a spate of murders at the notorious hostel were sentenced by the Pietermaritzburg High Court last month, among them a former soldier and a police officer. Tonight we ask, is the sentencing of the Glebelands 8 a turning point in its history of violence? Let's welcome to this conversation Mary Dahas, who's an honorary research fellow in the School of Law from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and also Vusi Zweni, who is the chairperson of Ubunye Bamawastela. Remember that you can also be part of the conversation. All you have to do is go on to Twitter. It is at Unfiltered SABC, and remember on Facebook, just search for Unfiltered SABC. But before we start the conversation, let's take a listen to this insert that has been produced by Enru Mukhatla.
The net has finally closed in on some of the most notorious perpetrators of the Glebelands hostel violence in KwaZulu-Natal. Last month, the Pietermaritzburg High Court convicted 8 hitmen to life sentences for crimes ranging from murder, attempted murder to extortion, among others, while former police detective and ring leader Bekukwazi Mdweshu and his cousin, a former soldier, Eugene Hlope, were sentenced to 10 years, suspended for 5 years due to time already served.
Accused numbers 2, 3, 6, 7, and 8 were a law unto themselves.
Residents of Glebelands Hostel in Umlazi were at the receiving end of their reign of terror between 2014 and 2016. Along the way, multiple witnesses have also been murdered. Despite the sentencing, families still feel it wasn't enough.
After his death, the people who killed him were arrested, and they were recently sentenced, of which, as the family, we're not happy with the sentencing that was handed over to his murderers, especially the men who organized and arranged all the matters that were happening in Glebelands. He was only sentenced to 10 years in prison, of which he's going to come out soon. We feel that he was supposed to have been handed as a harsher sentence.
Residents also remain fearful due to the alleged continuation of violence, with hitmen and illegal guns being the order of the day. The 2016 Moerane Commission saw the dominance of Glebelands testimonies due to its association with political violence.
The Premier will then indicate to what extent the findings or recommendations of the Commission will be implemented and give reasons thereof. I'm convinced that working together we will make sure that KwaZulu-Natal becomes a prosperous province with a healthy, secured and skilled population living in dignity and harmony.
Many years later, the tension remains, while various recommendations, including the 2017 Public Protector's remedial actions, remain mainly unfulfilled. And despite the celebration of the National Prosecuting Authority, the families of the victims are yet to accept that the sentencing of the notorious group represents a turning point in their lived experiences. Enru Mukhatla, Unfiltered, SABC.
And let's start off the conversation with Mary Dahas, one of the witnesses actually who testified in the Murani Commission, and also asking you, Mary, good evening, and thank you so much for making time for us this evening. Do you really believe that we have turned the tide when it comes to violence at Glebelands following these convictions, and also taking into consideration what Judge Nkosinathi Cili had said? He says that the accused have shown no remorse.
Can you hear me? That's what I need to know.
Yes, we can hear you, Mary. You can go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Right. Look, I'm not sure. I mean, in this particular instance, after years of carnage, we have made some progress with these convictions. But I mean, there's a lot of other people who should have been behind bars, including members of the Ulazi SAPS. And my experience with Glebelands goes right back to the 90s. And this is because basically we thought this new government was going to do something about living conditions in hostels. And, you know, under apartheid, we were all shouting about hostels and how bad they were, and the conditions were so bad, and they're even worse than ever are. So in the 90s, there was also violence of a different nature because of the dynamics at the time. In 2009, there was violence because a number of the residents broke away and joined Coke, and they were persecuted. Then, of course, we got this outbreak because of intra-ANC dynamics from Iran, because basically it was protest about the councillor who was actually doing nothing to deliver service, and then the retaliation started against representatives of hostel blocks who were actually drawing attention to the lack of service delivery. And the killings started, the torture started, and the Umlazi police were involved in this, not just, I mean, all along, the man who's been convicted in Mdweshu was known to be bringing weapons in, linking, it was widely known, and nothing was done. So for the time being, the violence has died down, so we hope it will stay.
But for now, do you think because of these convictions that it would be a deterrent? Because again, as I said, that Judge Clearly says that these convicted criminals haven't shown any remorse.
Look, that's my problem. And I mean, I'm sorry Vanessa's not here because she's the one who actually, she and I worked together on this particular thing, but Vanessa did all the hard work. She pushed and pushed until we got proper investigations, and we did. And we want to thank those police, the prosecutor, for it. But no, they showed no remorse. They're hardened criminals. I mean, that's the whole problem. And I think what really is worrying people is that the convictions were not, we think, I mean, I'm not talking for the hostel residents I've spoken to, that the convictions, they'll be out within a few years. Yeah. Our understanding was that the key man, Mdweshu, was actually carrying on his criminal plotting behind bars. So for now, it's kind of that dynamic has certainly died down, but who knows what will happen. Yeah. I mean, the sentences were nowhere near long enough for someone for, I mean, you know, Mdweshu, I mean, the sentence for, I mean, the killing of, for example, the killing of the guy who was gunned down in the Umlazi court precincts, Ndobela. I mean, we had warned against that. We had warned the police. Yeah. And the police at Umlazi were implicated because they did nothing and they allowed the killing to happen. And there is no remorse. I mean, Hlophe is a hardened criminal, and they have got away with very light sentences relative to the nature of their crime. So who knows?
And you raised quite an important point there, Mary, around that here we speak about hardened criminals and also the ability to orchestrate crime while behind bars. But let me just quickly bring in Vusi Zwenu, who is the chairperson of Ubunye Bamawastela. Babu Zwenu, good evening rather, and welcome to the show. Following this conviction of the 8, what was your response to it and the people around you? Is there a sense of perhaps the tide might have been turned?
Thank you. Good evening to you and your viewers. Firstly, the sentence which was laid up by the judge, when you compare it with the seen when the judge said the offenders didn't show any remorse. It was giving the hope that it's going to give them strong punishment. But when it says 10 years, it's where the families, when we are sitting on the ground with the people, listening to the views and the concern, even the families are not happy. The secondly, whenever it's saying, others says, if it's 10 years, it may be 7 years or 8 years, because there's a parole and all those, and those people will be out soon.
Yeah, even less than that 7 years.
So that's why the families are not. But then?
No, I was just saying even less than that 7 years that you speak about, yeah.
Yeah, that's a possibility. Then the second question would be, what is the purpose of the courts? The court is to send a strong message to other people who must learn. If you are doing this, this is a hard punishment you are going to get. Then the second question, did these people are getting enough punishment? The answer is no. So the punishment they particularly those who are trained by the state, and they were using the resources of the state to kill people. Whatever the difference is, I'm not care about it, but the question, they killed people for their differences. But the sentence is not equivalent to the sin there, because when you read the judges, the police is given 5 cases, murder of Novella and Tembu and others. There are some 5 serious cases.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes a huge doubt to anybody that how does the law got eyes? They believe that is a person from the state must be sentenced smaller, and those are not they are not, because seemingly when you understand, read all the judgment, those people who are the ring leaders, but they're given a smaller sentence.
Yeah.
Those are the confusion and worries us that is not sending a strong message to the community.
Yeah, and let's come back to that conversation just after the break, and also looking, of course, as Mary has now pointed out as well, looking at the ringleader of these hits, and this is a former detective who is the leader of the syndicate, Umdweshu. We'll have that conversation when we come back. Remember that you can also be part of the conversation. It is at Unfiltered SABC, or search for Unfiltered SABC on Facebook. And welcome back to this conversation. Remember that you can be part of the conversation as well on our social media platforms. It is at Unfiltered SABC on Twitter, and on Facebook, just search for Unfiltered SABC. By the way, we did invite the NPA to have this conversation with us this evening. They have declined the invitation. And also we've invited one of the relatives of one of the victims who was gunned down in 2014. Unfortunately, we seem to struggle to get a hold of him, but earlier on, Andrew, who compiled that report that we played at the beginning of the show, did manage to speak to him. And in that report, as you heard, he speaks about the possibility of some of these criminals being released very early, because considering that some of them only got 10 years. And that's when I want to start off, Mary, is looking at the criminal the sentencing rather of Umdweshu, who's been described as the leader of the syndicate. And this is a former police detective that we're speaking about here. Do you think that the NPA lost out on an opportunity to actually get the courts to send through a strong message, even taking the sentencing on appeal? We know, for instance, with Oscar Pistorius, that is what the NPA have done, but this time around they haven't done this.
Yeah. Yes, it's disappointing. I mean, Umdweshu, from the very start, I mean, he brought in an R4 or R5. It's on record. I wrote a letter to the area commissioner, the district commissioner, whatever it was then, where he was stationed, saying, have you checked your gun registered? I didn't even get a reply. He was bringing in the guns. He was a police member. We were telling the police this. At one stage, even the police on patrol were shot at by an R4 or R5. Nothing was done. That's what I mean. Only you know, a few of them have been sentenced. Now, we can go back to the very beginning. Those cases, I mean, the first man to die was a guy called Fieke in 2014. He died when he was being tortured. He was tubed to death with a plastic bag. We got information, we got statements. The DPP declined to prosecute. We even had a second post-mortem. We thought the progress had been made. This is now 8 years later. And now they still want to do an inquest when there's enough evidence there to prosecute. The policeman who suffocated that man with tubing to death, or Richard Nzama, who was tortured so badly that both Vanessa Berger and I saw the injuries when he was in court. We still don't have a prosecution of that because the hospital locally colludes with the police, lost the medical records. I mean, so I'm telling you this because it's the tip of the iceberg, but the perpetrator, the main perpetrator, who was allegedly colluding with the councillor at the time, because this was intra-ANC,
Yeah.
and service delivery, he's got the sentence that should have been much longer. So yeah, you're right. I mean, it's just not it's not a good enough sentence, just as Bruce has.
Babuzweni, looking at the Global Initiatives report that looked at trans-international crime, and one of the focuses being on what's happening in Glebelands, one of the observations that they make is that the rule of the gun highlighted a clear correlation between municipalities with high levels of corruption as well as the contestation over political power. From your vantage point, which you agree with this, what is it that you have noticed?
There are two things, actually. How the hostel was built, it is the hostel was built as a reserve, and the way the people are staying in these hostels, you can say now, that's why there are many people the hostel are not being manageable correctly by the municipality. One come, one goes out, who's coming, running away, murder people from that side coming to this side and all those things. We have seen that as an organization, particularly at Kwamashu Hostel, recently, after Mdweshu and his people have been sentenced, huge murdering people in Kwamashu happened. Goes back to what I'd said earlier. The sentence was talking to the scene, what's being done. So the hostel itself needs to be looked by the government.
Yeah, how do you do that? How do you do that, Babuzweni? Because you had the public protector as well, who had her own investigation, two public protectors at that. And then also you have the South African Human Rights Commission as well that has laid some complaints around what's happening at Glebelands Hostel. So what sort of intervention would be needed in a place such as Glebelands Hostel?
Actually, that is not to now tomorrow in another hostel. So the administration in the hostel, the administration is supposed to be corrected by the municipality. That is the first step. The second step, you need the municipality must listen to local leaders. So you need this policing forum, and all those stuff on the ground, working hand in hand with government. I'm talking about all the structures.
Okay, Babuzweni, let's just quickly take a break, and then we're going to come back to you and re-establish that link to him. Remember that we also love to hear from you. It is at Unfiltered SABC on Twitter and also at Unfiltered SABC on Facebook. The conversation when we come back. And welcome back to Unfiltered with me, Aldrin Simpier. Let's get some closing remarks from our guest this evening. Babuzweni, you were still concluding your point around some of the interventions that you think are needed for hostels in general.
Yeah, the first one I was talking about the administration, particularly from the municipalities. And the government structures like policing forums and all those things should work together, because now the criminals are easily to be hidden in every hostels, not only in Glebelands, in all the hostels. That is the concern we are having as an organization, that how are we going to fight the criminal in these hostels?
Okay, and Mary, let's hear closing remarks from your end as well. What sort of interventions do you think are needed? And also considering that some of, as Babuzweni has indicated as well, some of the firearms that are being used are state-issued firearms.
Well, that's part of a bigger problem. There's a huge problem. I think that most people don't realize just what a crisis we have in policing. I mean, it's a shambolic at the moment, policing. You know, it's a subject on its own. And the number of very dangerous firearms, you know, automatic, semi-automatic, that are circulating, some of them from within the police security industry that's not properly regulated. These are problems that are not just, as Babuzweni says, not just Glebelands, because historically, because of the conditions in the hostels, criminals tend to hide out there. I mean, while all this violence we're talking about with Mdweshe was going on, it was known that carjackers, hijackers were hiding out in some blocks of the hostels that were known for it. And as he said, commercial hostels are much worse because they are much more crowded, compact, more difficult to police even than Glebelands. The structures are different in these hostels. But, I mean, the hostels generally have not been properly maintained. I mean, roofs fall in during the rain. The local conditions are appalling, you know, sewage overflowing in the canals nearby. It's just dreadful. So you are not giving people the sort of conditions that humans should have to live in. Under apartheid, we shouted about the hostels, and nothing was done. Even the maintenance of the hostels, people tell me, is
and that issue actually being addressed by the public protector in her findings as well. Merida Haas, as well as Vusizweni, thank you so much for your time this evening, and thank you so much for choosing us this evening on S3. This is Unfiltered with me, Aldrin Simpier. Tot ziens. Enjoy the rest of your evening.